I never thought my parents would steal my entire inheritance to fund my brother's failed business ventures, but that's exactly what happened. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how I discover my parents have been lying to me for years, and how that betrayal led me to uncover a web of financial manipulation that destroyed our family forever. My grandmother on my mother's side was a remarkable woman. She came from nothing, built a successful real estate business from the ground up, and became quite wealthy by the time she retired. I was always close with her growing up. She taught me about money management, investing, and the importance of financial independence. Every summer, I would spend weeks at her house, and she would share stories about her life, her struggles, and how she built her empire. She always told me that education and hard work were the keys to success, and I took those lessons to heart. When I was in college, my grandmother sat me down and told me something important. She said she had set up trust funds for all three of her grandchildren, me, my younger brother Connor, who was 2 years behind me, and my cousin Lisa. She explained that each trust was worth approximately $300,000, and we would gain access to them when we turned 25. She said the money was meant to give us a head start in life, whether that meant buying a house, starting a business, or investing in our futures. I was overwhelmed with gratitude and promised her I would use it wisely. My grandmother passed away when I was 23, just before I graduated college. Her death hit me hard. She wasn't just my grandmother, she was my mentor, my friend, and one of the few people in my life who truly believed in me. At her funeral, my parents seemed devastated, but looking back now, I wonder if their tears were more about losing access to her money than losing her presence. My mother was her only child, which meant she inherited the bulk of my grandmother's estate, including her house and remaining business assets. The trust funds for us grandchildren were separate, managed by a law firm, and supposedly untouchable until we reached the designated age. I turned 25 2 years after my grandmother passed. I had graduated college, landed a decent job as a marketing coordinator, and was living in a small apartment trying to build my career. I was excited about accessing my trust fund because I wanted to use it as a down payment on a condo. I had been saving aggressively, and combined with the trust, I would finally be able to afford a place of my own. So on my 25th birthday, I called the law firm that my grandmother had told me was managing the trusts. That phone call changed everything. The receptionist transferred me to one of the attorneys, a man named Mr. Harrison. I explained who I was and that I was calling about my trust fund. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Mr. Harrison said something that made my stomach drop. He told me there was no trust fund in my name. I thought there had been a mistake, so I explained again, giving him my grandmother's full name, my full name, everything. He put me on hold for what felt like forever, and when he came back, he said he had searched their entire system and there was no record of any trust established by my grandmother for me. I was confused and starting to panic. I asked if maybe it was with a different firm, and he said it was possible, but unlikely since his firm had handled all of my grandmother's estate planning for over 20 years. He suggested I contact my family to get more information. I thanked him and hung up, my hands shaking. Something was very wrong. I called my mother immediately. When she answered, I tried to keep my voice calm and asked her about the trust fund. She was quiet for a moment, then said she didn't know what I was talking about. I reminded her that grandmother had told me about it, had explained the whole thing when I was in college. My mother's tone shifted, becoming defensive. She said that grandmother had probably been confused, that she was getting older and sometimes mixed things up, but I knew that wasn't true. My grandmother had been sharp as a tack until the day she died. I pressed my mother for answers, and finally she admitted that yes, there had been trust funds, but they had to be dissolved. She said there were estate taxes and debts that needed to be paid after grandmother passed, and the trusts were used to cover those expenses. I asked why no one had told me, and she said they didn't want to upset me while I was finishing college. She promised that they were planning to repay the money eventually, but things had been tight. I felt sick. $300,000 gone, and no one had even bothered to tell me. But that wasn't the worst part. Over the next few weeks, I started digging. I contacted the law firm again and requested any documentation related to my grandmother's estate. Mr. Harrison was helpful and sent me copies of the paperwork. What I discovered made my blood boil. The trust funds had existed, all three of them, exactly as my grandmother had described. But 2 years after she passed, my mother, as the executor of the estate, had petitioned the court to dissolve the trusts. The reason she gave was that there were outstanding debts and estate expenses that exceeded the liquid assets available. The court had approved it, and the money from all three trusts was transferred into the estate account. Here's where it gets even worse. I requested bank statements for the estate account, which was public record since it had gone through probate court. The money from the trusts had been transferred into the estate account, and then within weeks, large sums had been withdrawn. $50,000 here, $75,000 there, all written as checks. I couldn't see who the checks were made out to, but the pattern was clear. The money hadn't gone to estate taxes or debts. It had gone somewhere else. I needed to know where. I decided to talk to my cousin Lisa. She was a year older than me and had already turned 25. If my trust was gone, hers probably was too. I called her and asked if she had ever received her trust fund from grandmother. There was a long silence, and then she said no, that she had called about it when she turned 25 and been told the same thing, that it had been used for estate expenses. She said she had been upset, but didn't want to cause family drama, so she let it go. I told her I thought something shady had happened, and we needed to get to the bottom of it. She agreed to help. Together, Lisa and I hired a lawyer. We explained the situation, showed him the documentation, and asked if there was any way to find out where the money had actually gone. He said it would require some investigation, but it was possible. Over the next few months, our lawyer subpoenaed records, interviewed people, and pieced together the truth. And when he finally presented his findings to us, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. The money from our trust funds, nearly $900,000 total, had been funneled directly to my brother Connor. Specifically, it had been used to fund a series of business ventures he had started. My parents had written the checks to him, one after another, over the course of 2 years. Connor had always been the entrepreneurial type, full of big ideas and grand plans. But he was also reckless and bad with money. He had started a tech startup that failed within a year. Then he tried to open a restaurant that went under in 6 months. Then it was a real estate flipping scheme that left him drowning in debt. And my parents had funded all of it with money that was supposed to be mine and Lisa's. I confronted my parents with the evidence. I drove to their house unannounced, walked in with a folder full of bank statements and legal documents, and laid it all out on their kitchen table. My mother's face went pale. My father, who had been mostly quiet during my initial questions about the trust, suddenly became defensive. He said Connor had needed help, that he was trying to build something, and that as parents, they had to support him. I asked why that support had to come from my inheritance. Why couldn't they use their own money? My father said they had used their own money too, but it wasn't enough. Connor's ventures required more capital, and the trust funds were just sitting there, not being used. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mother tried a different approach. She started crying and said they had planned to pay us back, that once Connor's business took off, he would repay the money with interest. I asked which business she was referring to since all of them had failed. She didn't have an answer. I looked at my parents, these people who had raised me, and realized I didn't know them at all. They had stolen from me. They had stolen from Lisa. They had lied, manipulated the legal system, and betrayed the trust my grandmother had placed in them. And they were trying to justify it. I told them I was taking legal action. My mother begged me not to, said it would tear the family apart. I told her the family was already torn apart the moment they decided to steal from their own daughter. My father got angry then and said I was being dramatic, that it was family money and we should be supporting each other. I asked him if he would feel the same way if someone had stolen $300,000 from him. He didn't answer. I left their house that day and never looked back. Lisa and I moved forward with a lawsuit. We sued my parents for misappropriation of funds, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraud. The case was messy and painful. Family members took sides. Some supported us, saying what my parents did was inexcusable. Others defended them, saying we were being selfish and tearing the family apart over money. My brother Connor stayed silent through most of it, which somehow made it worse. He never apologized, never acknowledged his role in the whole mess, just hid behind our parents. The legal battle dragged on for over a year. My parents' lawyer tried every tactic to dismiss the case, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records don't lie. Eventually, we reached a settlement. My parents agreed to pay back the full amount of both trust funds plus interest. The total came to just over $1 million. But here's the thing, my parents didn't have that kind of money. They had spent it all on Connor's failed businesses. So the settlement required them to sell their house, the house I grew up in, the house my grandmother had helped them buy decades ago. When I found out they were being forced to sell, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Yes, I was getting my money back, but at what cost? My relationship with my parents was destroyed. My brother wouldn't speak to me. Half of my extended family thought I was a monster for suing my own parents. And the money, the thing that had caused all this pain, didn't feel worth it anymore. But I also knew I had done the right thing. My parents had made their choices, and actions have consequences. The house sold, and Lisa and I received our payments. I used mine to buy a condo, just like I had originally planned. But every time I walked through the door of my new home, I thought about what it had cost me. Not just in legal fees and stress, but in relationships and family bonds that would never be repaired. My mother sent me a text after the settlement was finalized. It said, "I hope you're happy now. You got your money, and we lost everything." I didn't respond. What could I say? They had brought this on themselves. But the story doesn't end there, because the fallout from the lawsuit rippled through my family in ways I never anticipated. Connor's wife, someone I had always gotten along with, filed for divorce. Apparently, she had no idea that Connor had blown through nearly $1 million of other people's money on failed business ventures. When the lawsuit brought everything to light, she realized she had married someone who was reckless, entitled, and had no sense of financial responsibility. She left him and took their 2 kids. Connor blamed me for that too, as if I had somehow forced him to lie to his wife and waste a fortune. My parents downsized to a small apartment in a less desirable part of town. My mother stopped attending family gatherings, too ashamed to face the relatives who now knew what they had done. My father aged seemingly overnight, the stress and guilt taking a visible toll on him. And me? I was left with money in my bank account and a fractured family that would never be whole again. People asked me if I regretted suing them, if I thought it was worth it. My answer was always the same. I didn't sue them for revenge. I sued them because they stole from me. And stealing has consequences regardless of whether the thief is a stranger or your own parent. Months turned into years, and the distance between me and my parents only grew. We didn't speak, didn't see each other, didn't acknowledge birthdays or holidays. It was as if we were strangers who happened to share DNA. My brother Connor spiraled further. Without our parents' financial support, he struggled. He moved back in with them in their tiny apartment, unemployed and bitter. I heard through the grapevine that he blamed me for ruining his life, that he told anyone who would listen that I was vindictive and cruel. But the truth was, Connor ruined his own life. He just couldn't accept responsibility for it. Lisa and I stayed close through everything. We had gone through the legal battle together, and it bonded us in a way that nothing else could have. She used her settlement money to go back to school and get her master's degree. Last I heard, she was thriving in her career and had cut off contact with my aunt and uncle as well. We both understood that sometimes choosing yourself means walking away from people who claim to love you but treat you like you're expendable. One evening, about 3 years after the lawsuit settled, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was my father. His voice sounded weak, older than I remembered. He said he was calling because my mother had been diagnosed with cancer. Stage 3, aggressive, not a good prognosis. He said she had been asking for me, that she wanted to see me before it was too late. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. Sadness, anger, guilt, confusion. Part of me wanted to rush to her side. Part of me wanted to hang up and pretend I never got the call. I asked my father if she wanted to apologize. There was a long pause, and then he said she wanted to make peace. I told him that making peace and apologizing were 2 different things. Making peace implied that we were both at fault, that we both needed to move past it. But I wasn't at fault. I hadn't stolen from anyone. I hadn't lied or manipulated. I had simply demanded what was rightfully mine. So if my mother wanted to see me, She needed to apologize, truly apologize, and take full responsibility for what she and my father had done. My father said he would talk to her and call me back. He never did. My mother passed away 6 months later. I found out through a Facebook post from a distant relative. No one from my immediate family called to tell me. There was no funeral invitation, no obituary sent my way, nothing. It was as if I didn't exist. I cried that night, not because I missed my mother, but because I mourned the relationship we could have had if she had just been honest, if she had just done the right thing. But she chose my brother over me, chose enabling his failures over respecting my inheritance, and that choice cost her a relationship with her daughter. A few weeks after my mother's death, I received a letter in the mail. It was from my father. Inside was a handwritten note, short and to the point. It said, "Your mother wanted you to know she was sorry. She was too proud to say it when she was alive, but she carried the guilt with her until the end. I hope you can forgive us someday." Reading those words brought no comfort. An apology delivered after death, through a second-hand note, felt hollow and meaningless. If she was truly sorry, she had years to tell me herself. But she didn't, and now it was too late. My father tried to reach out a few more times after that. He sent birthday cards, holiday messages, attempts at rebuilding some kind of connection. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. Too much had happened, too much pain and betrayal. And honestly, I didn't trust him. He had stood by and watched as my mother stole from me. He had defended their actions, justified the theft, and only now, after losing everything, did he seem to understand the gravity of what they had done. But understanding something after the fact doesn't undo the damage. Connor never reached out. Not once. He stayed bitter and angry, blaming everyone but himself for how his life turned out. I heard he eventually got a job working in sales, nothing glamorous, just enough to get by. He was still living with my father in that small apartment, two broken men clinging to what was left of their pride. There was no redemption arc for Connor, no moment where he realized his mistakes and tried to make amends. He was who he was, and that was never going to change. As for me, I moved on. I built a life that had nothing to do with my family of origin. I traveled, pursued hobbies, invested wisely, and surrounded myself with people who actually cared about me. I met someone wonderful, someone who understood my past and didn't judge me for the choices I had made. We got engaged, and when we started planning the wedding, the question of family came up. My fiancé asked if I wanted to invite my father or my brother. I thought about it for a long time and ultimately decided no. They didn't deserve to be part of my happy moments. They had lost that privilege when they chose lies and theft over honesty and respect. The wedding was beautiful. Lisa was my maid of honor, and as she stood beside me, I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, trust, and love. Lisa had stood by me when my own parents betrayed me. She had fought alongside me for what was right, even when it was hard. That made her more family than the people who share my last name ever were. And standing there on my wedding day, surrounded by friends and chosen family, I felt at peace. I had lost my parents, my brother, and a good chunk of my extended family, but I had gained something far more valuable: self-respect and the knowledge that I would never compromise my integrity for the comfort of others. People often ask me if I have regrets, if I wish I had handled things differently. The answer is complicated. Do I regret that my family fell apart? Yes. Do I regret that my mother died before we could reconcile? Yes. But do I regret standing up for myself and demanding accountability? Absolutely not. Because the alternative would have been staying silent, letting them get away with theft, and living the rest of my life knowing I had been too afraid to fight for what was mine. And that's not a life I could have lived with. In the years since everything happened, I've come to understand something important. Parents aren't perfect. They make mistakes, sometimes huge ones. But when those mistakes cross the line into betrayal, into criminal behavior, you have every right to hold them accountable. Blood relation doesn't give someone a free pass to hurt you, steal from you, or manipulate you. And choosing to walk away from toxic family members, even parents, isn't cruel or vindictive. It's self-preservation. My grandmother would have been proud of me. I know that sounds strange given everything that happened, but it's true. She always taught me to stand up for myself, to never let anyone take advantage of me, and to value my own worth. When my parents stole my inheritance, they stole something my grandmother had worked her entire life to provide for me. Fighting to get it back wasn't just about the money. It was about honoring her, about respecting the sacrifices she made and the legacy she tried to leave behind. And in that sense, I did exactly what she would have wanted me to do. Today, I'm in my late 30s. I have a career I love, a marriage built on mutual respect and trust, and a life that feels authentic and fulfilling. I own my home outright, thanks to the settlement money. I've invested wisely and built financial security for myself. And most importantly, I've built a chosen family of friends and loved ones who would never dream of betraying me the way my parents did. Do I sometimes wonder what my life would look like if none of this had happened? Sure. But then I remember that the version of me who would have stayed silent, who would have let my parents get away with theft just to keep the peace, wasn't someone I wanted to be. The last time I heard anything about my father was about a year ago. A distant cousin mentioned that he had moved into a nursing home. His health had declined, and Connor couldn't take care of him alone. Part of me felt sad hearing that. Part of me wondered if I should reach out, make peace before it was too late. But then I remembered everything that happened, the lies, the theft, the complete lack of accountability, and I realized that reaching out would only reopen wounds that had finally started to heal. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. And that's okay. I've learned that closure doesn't always come in the form of apologies or reconciliation. Sometimes closure is simply accepting that what happened, happened, and moving forward without the weight of unresolved anger. I don't hate my parents. I don't even think about them most days. They're just people who made terrible choices, and those choices had consequences. The consequence for them was losing their daughter. The consequence for me was losing my family of origin, but gaining clarity about who I am and what I stand for. If there's one lesson I could share from all of this, it's that standing up for yourself is never wrong. Even when it's painful, even when it costs you relationships, even when the entire world tells you you're being unreasonable. Your worth isn't determined by how much abuse you're willing to tolerate from people who claim to love you. And anyone who asks you to stay silent about injustice, whether it's theft, abuse, or betrayal, is asking you to sacrifice your dignity for their comfort. Don't do it. Choose yourself. Choose truth. Choose integrity. Because at the end of the day, those are the only things that truly belong to you, and no one can take them away unless you let them. So yes, my parents stole my inheritance. Yes, I sued them and won. Yes, it destroyed my family, but also freed me. Freed me from the burden of pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. Freed me from the exhausting work of maintaining relationships with people who saw me as less important than their golden child. Freed me to build a life based on honesty and respect rather than obligation and guilt. And that freedom, hard-won and bitterly earned, is worth more than any inheritance ever could be.